Hi, I'm Jill McCorkle, a proud member of Writers for Democratic Action, and honored to welcome you to today's very important panel. For those unfamiliar with Writers for Democratic Action, it's an organization committed to bringing together the literary community to demand racial and economic justice, champion suffrage for all people, oppose impediments to democratic government, and resist white supremacist, nationalist, and fascist movements. We stand vigilant in the service of the Republic to promote the common good. Please be sure and visit the website. It'll be listed in the chat to learn more about the organization as well as future panels. On January 15th, 2022, WDA will sponsor a discussion entitled Fragile Democracies and Mythical Narratives, hosted by Writers for Democratic Action founding members Rachel Dwoskin and Siri Husfit. And on February 12th, there will be an afternoon with Texas writers and activists hosted by Writers for Democratic Action founding member Robin Davidson. But today we are here for Florida, Elections Matter. A big thanks to Books and Books, partner of Writers for Democratic Action, for hosting today's event, as well as many others. Introducing and leading today's extraordinary lineup is a man who needs no introduction at all in the book world, a champion of both literature and democracy, founding member of Writers for Democratic Action, and the extremely wise and very generous owner of Books and Books. It's my pleasure to introduce Mitchell Kaplan. Thank you, Mitchell.
Well, thank you, Jill. It's really wonderful for you to be involved, and I want to give a shout out to everyone at WDA, Writers for Democratic Action. It's been our real thrill and pleasure to be able to be a host of so many different events that are sponsored by them. Florida. My daughter is 10. It's election night. The year is 2000. And I sit with Anya watching the returns. It's her first time being aware of a presidential election. The TV blares. Gore wins Florida. President Gore it is. We high five. A few minutes later, wait, no, Florida, too close to call. Election up in the air. And then Bush wins Florida. President Bush it is. Anya looks at me. No, nobody wins Florida. Too close to call. Anya goes to sleep. She can't take it anymore. But before she does, I find it very hard to explain to her what's happening, what we're witnessing. To this day, her one big takeaway, her one memory, is that it all came down to Florida. She remembers that from Tim Russert. We all remember the turmoil that ensued the next number of weeks, leading to that Supreme Court decision and to the vice president's concession, which led to 8 years of President Bush. 9/11, Iraq, torture, economic chaos, sliding backward on issues of climate change, gun control, not to mention giving up a chance to influence the judiciary. Elections do matter. And after the hopeful 8 years of Barack Obama, once again, Florida has an outsized role in an election. Donald Trump wins Florida, and Donald Trump becomes president. I don't need to detail all that we've suffered through. The threat to our democracy, even in the wake of his loss in 2020. I always used to think that we at least had the Supreme Court as a backstop, but with his 3 appointments and the tenor of the court now, not anymore. Elections matter. The 2022 elections, in my mind, matter more than just about any that I can recall. If the House and/or Senate fall back in the hands of a political party that has shown that it's comfortable with espousing anti-democratic, authoritarian, nationalist rhetoric and policies, I can't be sure that the center will hold. So here we are. I believe we as a literary community must act, use the powers of communication that we have to change the narrative, to galvanize voters, to make a difference. So much is at stake for Anya, for my twin sons, for all of us. And as it's always Florida, 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 we have a chance in 2022 to win the governorship and thwart the presidential plans of Ron DeSantis. We can flip a Senate seat, and we can reverse the congressional losses we suffered in 2020, which will allow us to go a very long way to fighting back against forces that pose an existential threat to who we are as a people. And I can think of no two better women to help us understand just what we must do to make sure that 2022 does not turn out the way the pundits now predict. Donna Shalala and Debbie Mucarsel-Powell are two heroines of mine, figures who as members of Congress made a world of difference. Debbie immigrated to the U.S. as a young girl with her mom and sisters in search of a better life. Her mother worked at double shifts in healthcare, and Debbie worked all through high school and received a scholarship to Pitzer College studying political science. This led to a master's degree in international political economy from Claremont University. Her work for over 25 years has been dedicated to improving the lives of underserved communities in Miami-Dade County, and for a long time at the College of Health at Florida International University. This commitment to public service brought her to a run for Congress, where she unseated a sitting Republican in 2018. As a member of Congress, Debbie sat on the Judiciary Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. She was an integral member of the group that laid the groundwork for the impeachment of Donald Trump. In 2020, although Joe Biden won the presidency, many House members lost their seats, and Debbie was narrowly defeated. She remains, though, a strong voice for the issues that matter to her. Gun control. Her father was murdered outside his home in Ecuador when she was only 24 years old, and she works very closely with the Giffords and other advocates trying to temper our gun culture. Green energy, issues of climate change, securing women's rights, and issues of equity and fairness. Donna Shalala, like Debbie, has spent her entire life fighting to improve the lives of others. She has advocated tirelessly for women's rights, civil rights, increased access to health care, better education and schools, and a clean, sustainable environment. Donna was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, although her grandparents were migrants from Lebanon, moving to the U.S. to pursue a better life. She has a history degree from Western College for Women and a PhD from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. She served as president of Hunter College in New York City, and then chancellor of the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Her service in government included working as assistant secretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Carter. I remember when he authorized solar panels be placed on the roof of the White House. That was Donna's doing. Under President Clinton, Donna served for 8 years as the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services. In fact, when she left that post, the Washington Post described her as, quote, one of the most successful government managers of modern times. She has so many awards. She's the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and among her other honors is the Nelson Mandela Award for Health and Human Rights. I first met Donna in her role as president of the University of Miami, a role she assumed from 2001 to 2015, and her commitment to the South Florida community led her to run successfully for Congress in 2018. She too flipped a Republican seat and she went on to serve on the House Committee on Education and on the Rules Committee. In 2020, she too narrowly lost her seat. What a real profound loss it's been for all of us in South Florida to not be represented by Debbie and Donna. Our country loses out too. They've been tireless advocates for all that's right. And if I haven't embarrassed them enough, I want to also say that they've been ardent supporters of all things literary. I first met Debbie as a customer at Books and Books. Her interest in books runs very, very deep. And I can honestly say that there is no one, and that's no one, who has been as supportive of writers and readers in Miami and South Florida as Donna. She and I made some good trouble together when she was at the U. We together brought in everyone from Sonia Sotomayor to Rachel Maddow. Her conversations with them are still being talked about, and I was always particularly moved by how she insisted that these events were for students first, the dignitaries relegated to the back benches. So without further ado, let me bring Debbie Mucarsel-Powell and Donna Shalala to the virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Mitch. Thank you so much for such an incredible introduction.
Of course. And I want to welcome you. And I want to tell the audience that the three of us, we want this to be an interactive session. So I'm going to start by asking some questions, and then the audience too can go to the Q&A button on the bottom and you can ask your questions. But I'm going to ask you to make sure that they're questions. So here goes to the two of you. As I promised you, I'm going to ask you what happened in 2020. President Biden beat Trump, but we took a hit in the House. We lost many seats, including yours.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to have this discussion. I don't think there's anything more important for us to be discussing on a Saturday afternoon and at such a critical moment than the future of Florida here for 2022 and 2024. Let me say that I think what happened in 2020, it was a combination, it was a perfect storm of different things that came to us. After Donald Trump won in 2016, the Trump administration, the Trump Republican Party, the RNC, the Republican Party of Florida, they never stopped communicating with voters here in the state of Florida. They were present. Trump, Pence, his attorney general, and different cabinet members continued to visit the state continuously. If you remember, Mitch and everyone watching, we would see Vice President Mike Pence here at FIU, going to Versailles with Governor DeSantis, with Jeanette Nunez. I mean, they were definitely as present as I have seen any other administration be here in the state. So they were targeting Florida early on. When we started the 2020 year in January, we already were watching what was happening with the coronavirus in China. We knew that it could be coming into the US pretty quickly, but we really never imagined it was going to hit with such force. And by the end of February, and I remember Donna and I, we had a meeting with a lot of the different healthcare experts. They were giving us dire warnings that coronavirus was coming to the United States, that we were going to see a huge impact in our healthcare infrastructure and our economy, just like we were seeing in Europe. So by March, things started to shut down very quickly. We had to stop all of our legislative efforts to focus primarily on passing the coronavirus bill that was going to fund our public health infrastructure, funding testing, funding all the research to get the vaccines rolling out. We knew it was going to take some time, 12 to 18 months. We had to provide support for small businesses. We knew that the economy was going to be hit primarily by a shutdown because of the pandemic. So our efforts had to be primarily focused on that. And as we were getting closer to the elections, we in Florida specifically, that summer before the 2020 election, we had the highest number of coronavirus cases in the entire country. We became the hotspot. So the Democratic Party nationally and the Democratic Party here along with a lot of experts, were recommending that we did not go out and knock on doors, that we do not hold public events. So we started, as you know now, we started doing all of our work via Zoom. At the same time, Mitch, we were being targeted with a huge effort of disinformation that was targeting primarily in Miami-Dade County, our Hispanic community. And we knew things were going on, but I don't think we understood at that point, and maybe we should have. That's a mistake, I think, from a lot of from the Democratic consultants, the Democratic Party, that we didn't understand the coordination that was happening, whether it was through social media, mainstream media, printed media. And I remember there was a moment as we were preparing for the election, it was early September, that my mother was receiving El Nuevo Herald, and in it was a 7-page insert that was paid for by Libre. Libre, as many of you may know, is a Koch brothers funded operation that comes into primarily Hispanic communities without really a political affiliation, but just to help Hispanic communities and then start to influence them to vote for the Republicans. Well, it was a 7-page insert that was filled with misinformation, promoting fear to not vote by mail, to that there was going to be voter fraud, to not vote for Biden, with a lot of anti-Semitic probes that was printed there. And that's when we really started to see all the links of WhatsApp chats, social media, really targeting the Democrats as the party of socialists, that we were going to shut down the economy, that we were going to be the demise of freedom for Americans here in our country, which was the farthest thing from the truth. So I asked, actually, along with my Congressional Hispanic Caucus chair at the time, Representative Joaquin Castro, we wrote a letter to the FBI to investigate who was funding this operation, where was this misinformation coming from? And I have yet to hear back from the FBI. I've asked the Congressional Hispanic Caucus to continue to put pressure in that effort, because the misinformation has continued. Republicans have dug in. We have seen a radicalization of the Republican Party that we have never seen before. And combined with the lack of being physically present, I truly believe that, especially in an area like Miami-Dade County, but all over America also, when you want people to know what you stand for, if you want to combat all the lies that are being said about you, you need to be present in our community. And that was really difficult because of COVID at the time. And so, we worked really hard. Despite all the challenges, we did knock on tens of thousands of doors. We held hours and hours of calls to our voters. We just didn't realize how much more the Republicans were doing to bring out voters that hadn't voted since 2012. So even though I didn't lose any of my vote count, the votes that we were expecting, all those people came out, independents, the Latino community, Democrats, some Republicans. What we saw was a surge of people that came out to vote for Trump and the Republicans down the ticket, voters that we hadn't seen before, that we hadn't seen since 2012. Now, one more thing that I want to add before, because I want to hear from Donna also, from her perspective. We were working very closely at the time. Donna was very gracious to also help me with some canvassers from her campaign. We're knocking on doors in my area. Also, we were really talking consistently to make sure that we did everything we needed to do. But the Democratic brand has become a toxic brand, specifically in the state of Florida. We have a problem with our brand because of the attacks and the misinformation that the Republicans have been using to really demoralize the electorate and have that fear of voting for Democrats. So we elected, as you know, Mitch, our first Democratic mayor,
right,
female mayor, Daniela Levine Cava. She's a Democrat. I endorsed her. I worked with her. I campaigned with her. Donna did the same. She won her election. She's a Democrat, but she did not have the D next to her name. The same thing happened with Luisa Santos in my district, a school board member, a young and exciting candidate that came out. Nobody thought she was going to win. She did a lot of groundwork and she won, but she didn't have the D next to her name. Another Democrat elected in my district. So we need to pay attention to what's happening with the Democratic brand, specifically here in the state of Florida. There's a lot of work that we need to do. And I'm already doing that work with the help of a lot of organizations here in the state. So I remain hopeful, but I want to hear from Donna also. Donna, what do you think about what happened in your area?
Well, I think that everybody that had a D behind their name lost, with a single exception of someone that was in a Democratic district, Nick Duran. All of our state legislative candidates, all of our state Senate candidates, anyone that had a D behind their name lost in the election. So it was not just Debbie and myself, it was everyone that had a D. We won a number of races where they ran nonpartisan races, like the mayoral race. That is, she did not have a D behind her name. Eileen Higgins didn't have a D behind her name for county commission. So it was really a shot at the Democratic Party. That's number one. What I would add too is that they came in with a tremendous registration campaign. Even though we had millions of dollars for registration, I have no idea where that money went, but they registered at least 25,000 voters in across Miami-Dade County. Their turnout, as Debbie told us, their turnout was almost 85%, and our turnout was 75%. The independents broke for them, where we usually can split them, but it was really their registration and their turnout operation. We should have been going door to door earlier. We should, but normally in a presidential campaign, they fund the door to door operation. We had to fund whatever we had to fund ourselves. But I don't think this was about money. I think this was about moving the White House, the Trump White House, to South Florida and just pounding us that we're socialists, that we're for defunding the police. And they pounded us every single day about these issues. We were the leaders on taking care of the Venezuelan people, and yet we lost much of the Venezuelan vote. And Debbie can explain what Hispanic media did to us, but more than anything else, the presence of Donald Trump, of his cabinet, of the vice president in South Florida was unprecedented for an area. But it was really, I think, their ability to register their voters and to turn them out in huge numbers. We didn't lose that much. And a 75% turnout for Democrats is a good turnout, but it wasn't good enough. And it turned out the president did not have the kind of huge coattails of President Biden that we expected. So it was a combination of things. But I also think that they had done their registration early. They turned out their voters. They pounded us. Elections are about people's lives, and they scared people to death down here.
So both of you are saying that basically the rhetoric that was used, the scare tactics that was used, made people vote against their self-interests, right? Because really we all know that the interests of the people are with the policies that you both were promulgating, right?
Yeah, actually, you know what's funny? Some of the things that I forgot to mention earlier is the fear tactics. It wasn't only the misinformation; it was also fear tactics in my district. And I don't know, Donna, if you saw the same thing, but they were trying to keep the African American community at home. They were receiving messages that things were going to be violent, that things may not be safe if you come out to vote. And so a lot of people stayed home. And I remember being in one of these polling stations where one of my constituents who came and said, I just voted for you. And she was a part of the African American community there in my district, showed me, look at what I got from a friend, and they're concerned. They're scared to come out. So Republicans were using all sorts of tactics to influence the election, including, which a story that has become national, placing a ghost candidate, which right now there's a lawsuit against the people that were involved, placing a ghost candidate, paying him to put his name on the ballot, which resulted in the loss of our state senator, Jose Javier Rodriguez. So the Republicans are really using every trick they have to try and win these elections.
So that begs the question in terms of, these threats continue today, right? So can you talk a little bit about how these threats have even gotten worse? The voter suppression laws that, have been promulgated and all that sort of thing. Would you talk a little bit about where we are right now in terms of, gerrymandering, the redistricting? What's happening now that you're seeing?
Well, the gerrymandering is very clear. If you look at my district, they took away the beach. That's a huge Democratic area. And they added Westchester, which is a Republican area. They think I'm a communist out there.
Yeah. And you and everybody else, you and any Democrat, right? They're calling us Marxists now, apparently.
Yeah. So gerrymandering is very much present. It's not that we can't win these districts because they're still sort of toss-up districts, but they've been pounding us. Now, luckily, we have some candidates and we'll have some messages. If you look at probably the candidate for the United States Senate to run against Marco Rubio, Val Demings, they can't pin on her that she's going to defund the police because she was a police chief.
Yeah.
Right. That's Val Demings, exactly. But so, what are some of the things that we need to do to kind of change these narratives? In fact, I'm going to go to the questions because someone's asking a direct question. The very first question is, what can be done to change the Hispanic notion and belief that Democrats are communists? So, we all know they're not necessarily, and there are very few communists left in the world that are in this country. So the question is, how do we recapture the narrative? What do we do? What would what practical things can we do to recapture that narrative?
Well, let me go back just a few steps here. I think when you asked what is happening now, we, like you said, Mitch, I'm extremely, extremely concerned that we are at a point that if we lose the House of Representatives in 2022, we are on the road of losing our democracy. And I am not saying this to alarm anyone. I am saying this because the Republicans, from what we're seeing, the extreme radicalization of the Republican Party right now, almost 70% of Republicans believe that Biden was not elected legitimately. They believe that there was voter fraud. The Republicans have been attacking the trust of our institutions, chipping away at that trust now for quite some time. So it's much easier for Republicans to believe that there was voter fraud. And they have passed close to 400 voter suppression bills all over the country, including here in the state of Florida, to make it much harder for people to vote, especially for those voters that want to vote by mail. Here, they're going to now have to re-register to vote by mail. Many voters here do not know that their request for a vote by mail now has to be renewed, and it's only going to last for 2 years, not for 2 election cycles like it used to be before. But also combined with the gerrymandering, we can focus and talk about messaging all you want. We can talk about registering voters. We can talk about organizing. But if we don't pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the federal bill that's right now in the Senate that was introduced by Senator Amy Klobuchar, everyone can come out and vote. But with the gerrymandering and the voter suppression laws, the Republicans are setting the stage to win. And if the House is controlled by Republicans, we already saw what happened on January 6th. They will vote to overturn the election, even if a Democrat wins in 2024. So we have to protect the freedom for every voter that comes out to the ballot box for their voice to be counted. I think that is the first thing that we need to make sure to work together to put that pressure, not only on the Senate, but on President Biden. He is, after all, right now the leader of our nation. And he has mentioned that this is a priority for him. And so he needs to make sure that we protect our democracy, because if we do not, 2022 is not even a year away, and it's the road to really end our democracy. And again, I don't want to be an alarmist, but going back to the communism message, first of all, no, you need to be very firm in saying that we are not, as Democrats, we're not socialists, we are not communists, we are capitalists. And then we need to make sure that we pivot away from that and talk about what are the policies that we're working for. We're the only party right now in America that is defending and promoting democracy here in the US and abroad. We are the only party in America that is going to make sure that our communities are safe and free from gun violence. We are the only party making sure that we work for all Americans so that they all have economic opportunities. And I think that that's the message that we need to repeat over and over and over again until people understand. And I think that young voters do understand that.
But it's not just a message for people to understand. I said before that I think elections are about people's lives. People have to feel that under Democratic leadership, their lives are better. So whether it's the child tax credit where people are actually getting, that's refundable, where people are actually getting checks, or the fact that we've saved lives with vaccines, whatever the list is, we need 3 or 4 examples where people actually feel that their lives are better because Democrats are in charge, that they're safe, they're safer, that they're economically in better shape. And I think it is the economy, stupid. By next year, people have to feel that economically they're in better shape, their children have more opportunities. I've always felt that we ought to campaign on the future, on anticipating the future, on protecting kids. But it's got to be 1 or 2 things. It can't confuse people with what the price is of Build Back Better. That's irrelevant. It's what's in Build Back Better that's important to people's lives. So it's a combination of the voting rights issues that Debbie's talking about and the things that Congress, the Democrats have passed that make people's lives better, that give them more opportunities, that actually help them economically to be better.
So as candidates are canvassing, they need to make sure that that connection is made, that connection between, what the candidate is in favor of and what will make their life, the voters' lives better. That needs to be cemented better. And maybe with COVID being lessened a little bit, maybe that people can go door to door and knock on doors and that sort of thing. Are there any particular groups that you guys are working with now that you are particularly impressed with, where people who are listening to this can get involved with in order to, start doing some of these things that we're talking about?
Donna, you want to start with that?
I think it's important. We haven't talked about women's rights here and about the scariness of the Supreme Court and women's ability to control their own bodies. While in South Florida, that's not a central issue. It's so Catholic. It is for young people, and it is for Democrats. So we have to. I'm a big supporter of Emily's List, of Planned Parenthood, of all those organizations. But I want Debbie to talk about gun safety and those issues. The environmental groups are critical to us. In South Florida, it's life or death. And anything we can do with the activism around the environment is extremely important. And reducing racial disparities in a wide variety of ways. We, both of us, have healthcare backgrounds, so we pound on the fact that it's Democrats that passed Obamacare, the ACA. We have the largest enrollment in the ACA of any district in the country.
Yeah, down here in South Florida, that's right. There are a lot of amazing groups, and a lot of them, I talked to several of them. Florida Rising, the Miami Freedom Project, Mi Vecino it's a new group that has been registering voters in Latino communities, which are doing really great work. I think some of the most effective groups down here in South Florida have been our unions. They have mobilized voters and their membership, and they have helped both Donna and I knock on doors, whether it's the United Teachers of Dade Union, the AFL-CIO, the Teamsters. They're incredible, and they understand that what the Democrats stand for is really economic opportunity for everyone. Because when we have a strong middle class, we know that the economy thrives in the United States. Funding education, funding research and innovation. That's what we need to focus on. But so in terms of gun violence,
LGBTQ groups too, SAVE.
Oh, yes,
They have been very
LGBTQ,
important
Equality Florida, Save Dade, yes. So I've been doing a lot of work on gun violence. Like you said, Mitch, it's a personal issue for me. And unfortunately, we're seeing such a high rate of homicides due to the gun violence epidemic, also a high rate of suicide. Just this week alone, we had 12 threats of school shootings in Miami-Dade County. This is an issue that mobilizes everyone, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. And I've seen polls that are showing that close to 70% of women want this to be the top issue for the candidate that is on the ballot, for the candidate that they're going to vote for. The Democrat that runs on this issue against Marco Rubio can beat him only on this issue by 20 points. So groups like Giffords that I've been working with, groups like March for Our Lives, the Brady campaign, Moms Demand, we need to make sure that we build that coalition to mobilize our community. It's an issue that mobilizes Hispanic communities, African-American communities, white communities. And we didn't do that, right? We didn't talk about gun violence. We only talked about COVID in 2020.
Well, both of you mentioned before that Trump was down here basically living in South Florida. What do we need to do to get the current administration to be spending more time down here? How do we get that to happen?
I think both of us are talking to the administration and making it very clear that they have to have a presence down here, but more importantly, they have to understand the issues down here, what people care about. And people in South Florida, particularly the Hispanic community, are linked to their countries. So what Joe Biden does about the Americas, including, and I include the Caribbean in that, what his policies are in places where we're losing democracies are critically important in overcoming the sense that that we're socialists or communists or Marxists or whatever they want to call us.
Yeah, we can't, I have to say, everybody needs to pay attention to Florida. The White House needs to pay attention to Florida. We cannot allow Governor DeSantis to travel all over the country, setting up his presidential campaign, raising close to $60 million, and then scramble 3 months before the 24 election, trying to combat someone that wants to become the dictator of America in 2024. DeSantis is not only a Trump loyalist, he is more dangerous than Donald Trump. Just imagine having Christina Pusha, his press secretary, who focuses on spreading fake conspiracy theories, being the White House secretary. America, please do not let that happen. That's why Florida is so important. That's why President Biden needs to come down and talk about the incredible policies that he's passing. Our infrastructure, that was a monumental bill that was passed on a bipartisan basis. He needs to come down and talk about that bill with Floridians, because Floridians are smart. We understand what it is that we need. We need investments on our coastal communities to combat sea level rise. We need those investments to make sure that we have better access to public transportation. We need the president to come down here. And I think Donna and I have made that very clear. And all of you can help us make that clear to him and his advisors as well.
So you suggest that people could write, call up the administration, let them know that we want them down here. Are you? Yes. Do you see the rest of the state having similar issues that we have, political issues? I know that the voter suppression laws are going to affect a lot of people in that I-4 corridor. It's going to affect people in African American communities very strongly. What is your take on the rest of the state as well?
Well, the rest of the state, I think we shouldn't write off rural areas. We're about to get broadband passed as part of these bills, so that every part of the state will have access to the internet. And so that parents don't have to drive to a fast food restaurant so their kids can get their homework done. We are in the bill, Build Back Better, is the opportunity for Floridians, because we didn't expand Medicaid, for them to get into the Affordable Care Act. We're talking about 1 million people. Many of them are small business people, or they live in rural areas and don't have access to healthcare. You can't have rural Florida without access to good healthcare and good healthcare insurance. We have literally almost 1 million people that will get additional coverage. That's a lot of the upstate areas, but we have to demonstrate to people up there that Democrats care about their lives, understand their lives, and are delivering for them.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. And I think that the message that I'm hearing is, hopefully there'll be a number of writers that are listening to this as well, and a lot of Floridians who are writers. And there's no reason why they can't use those skills to try to get this message across, no matter where they're living in Florida, that we need to sort of tie people's interests and self-interests to what's actually happening. And that's one way of
stories. We have to tell stories. I tell the story of going into a restaurant and having a mother wave me over, and she wanted me to explain to her young son what Congress did. And so I explained to him what Congress, I think he was about 9 years old. And finally I got him into conversation. I said, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said he wanted to be a police officer. And I said, that's great. That's a great profession. And I said, why do you want to be a police officer? And he said, because I want to protect the kids in my school. Now, no child in Florida should feel responsible to pick a profession based. That's our responsibility. We're the adults. We're supposed to protect the children. But in listening to voters and in listening to people in our community, we have to change the narrative. And the narrative has to be real people talking about their fears and about their dreams. Writers can do that better than anyone else. I tell stories.
Yeah, I agree with Donna. And that reminds me of how important it is to go, especially as we talk about rural areas. We need to go where our voters are and not discard and assume that Republicans won't vote for us. That's not true. That's an arrogant assumption. I think that we need to go and meet people where they're at. And I can tell you one short story. I was canvassing for a candidate for the elections in November in Joe Carroyo's district. And I knocked on the door of this young dad. He must have been in his mid-30s, exhausted. It was a Saturday afternoon. Didn't want to go out and vote, had so many things to do. It was his only day off. People are tired. They're working 2 jobs to make ends meet. But then I asked him, are you receiving, because he seemed like he was struggling. And I said, are you receiving the child tax credit? Are you getting that direct deposit helping you for the kids that you have at home? And his face immediately relaxed. And he was like, yes. Oh, yes, I am. And so I reminded him how important those things are for his family and why it's so important for him to vote. And his demeanor changed immediately. And he said, yes, okay. So he was thinking and asking, where can I go and where should I vote? And those are the type of things that Donna is saying, like listening to the people, having those conversations. What is it that they need? People are struggling, and we need to understand that.
Going to the Medicare offices, and telling people what's going on there. And you're absolutely right. One of the things that
Medicare is actually delivered through Social Security offices. So when you go to Social Security, they sign you up for Medicare and they answer your questions there.
I just signed up. I know how that is. So, one of the things that many of us have been talking about, and I see it at the bookshop, we have a group that comes in and they do voter registration every other weekend at the bookstore. And the conversations that happen there are really, really interesting. And that is a really good kind of entry level point of being able to begin a discussion. And if you took that registration, the registration efforts and you took it to where people actually are, you can then really begin to hammer home exactly the kinds of things you're talking about.
Well,
So
Yeah,
we've
do-
seen
do-
that
Go
in
ahead.
churches,
I was interested to say, do you think that there is room?
college campuses.
Is there room to register more people here in the state of Florida?
Oh, yes.
Oh, Mitch, that is like registration. We've lost our voter registration advantage. Again, it was reported that the
Explain that,
Republican
Debbie,
Party.
a little bit. Explain that a little bit, because as a kid growing up, Florida was always more democratic than any other state, pretty much. Well, not any other state, but the disparity was really great. And I just recently read that it's now almost level. Is that correct?
That apparently we just lost our voter registration advantage in Florida. And why? Because the Republican National Committee, the National Party, invested $5 million just this year alone on voter registration efforts. We are not registering voters. It is the fault, and I'm blaming specifically the state party and the national party in not focusing primarily on registering voters. There are multiple groups of people that have moved to Florida and young voters that are turning 18 that are ready to register, that are ready to participate, that need to be reached out to. A lot of new citizens that have just become citizens after applying and going through that process. They are the most excited citizens that we have in this country. They're ready to come out to vote. We're not doing the work.
And where are we with the prisoner registration? The law, the amendment that passed that said that if you had a felony record, you could then register to vote. Where does that stand right now in the courts?
Painful to get individuals through that process. But I have to say, attorney here has worked very hard on it. Kathy has worked very hard in South Florida on getting more people registered.
Well, I don't want to make news today, but one of the questions is we hear so much about what's happening in the whole state, but we're not hearing that much about who's running for Congress down here. So are either of you thinking about it?
I think we're both thinking about it. To be fair, we're both thinking about it. We're analyzing what the gerrymandering did. We're in the process of trying to figure out who is the best candidate in the districts that have been gerrymandered. Will we have candidates against in the seats that we flipped? I believe that we will, but I can't answer the question about who the best candidate is. And I think Debbie and I are both having our political people looking very closely at these districts.
Well, that's really
strategizing good. And making sure that we have the best candidates that can beat Jimenez and Salazar. Two of the worst representatives we have ever seen representing our areas. Unfortunately, I apologize for that, South Florida, but we can get it back on track in 22.
It is a huge difference of what we have there now versus what we did have there before. But I also want to call on your expertise in Congress and ask you. You mentioned before the importance of passing, the Voters' Rights Act, the act that's in front of Congress. And there's big talk about how it could never really pass unless there was some kind of carve out in the filibuster. Is there any chance of that particularly happening, do you think?
I think President Biden needs to really make this his top issue. And this is not political anymore. I mean, this truly is about protecting the republic, protecting the Constitution of the United States. It's an archaic rule that it's just a rule of the Senate that can be removed as it pertains to our democracy. Maybe it's not something that they need to overrule for every bill that comes to the Senate, but as it pertains to the safety and the future of our democracy, I absolutely think that President Biden and Chuck Schumer, Speaker Pelosi, they need to really figure out how we can move bills that will protect the freedom to vote.
With your ear to the ground, do you see that happening anytime soon?
I think it has to happen before the next election. I think it's absolutely critical that it happen not before the next presidential election, but
before this election.
Before this election that's coming up. A friend of mine said, be patient. And I said, I understand about patience. The great running backs at the University of Miami are very if you watch them, they're very patient, waiting for the hole to open up. And then they run through
very fast.
The hole.
That's great.
I think our patience is wearing out. And we have to see it linked to protecting our democracy. Everybody says democracy is so fragile. I'm worried about the future of the country. This is it. This is what they can do. If you want to think of one practical thing that they can do, this is what they should and must do.
This is the break the glass moment, right?
Yeah. And to all the people that are watching, those writers that are not from Florida, let me just say that as someone that was born in Ecuador, that came here at 14, that have seen what it means when a political party is changing the laws for a power grab. We've seen all the alarm bells sounding, telling us that the Republican Party, as it stands today, is setting the infrastructure to take over government so that they can rule in an authoritarian regime and really violating and taking away our most precious civil rights, including the violation of women's rights.
And Debbie, you saw it very clearly when you were on the Judiciary Committee, right? I mean, you saw this movement begin.
Oh, it was crazy, Mitch. I remember, first of all, what an incredible, only in this country does an immigrant like myself get elected to go serve in Congress. What an incredible institution. What we have the most amazing, I truly believe the most amazing country where anyone can make it if you work hard here in America. And I think that's what we need to protect. And I was sitting in the Judiciary Committee and I could not believe the lies and the conspiracy theories that were being thrown out by Republican members in that committee. And they're allowed to do that. But one of the things that going back when we were preparing for the 2020 election, we had a lot of constitutional and legal experts briefing the Judiciary Committee on all the steps that the Republicans could take to overturn the will of the voters for Republican state legislatures to elect their electors so that they would vote for Trump and not Biden, even if the majority vote was voting for Biden. There's a legal framework that they can use to do that. And I think that right now, that's what we're seeing. That's what they're preparing to do. And if we have a Republican majority in the House, then that's why I say that in 2024, it doesn't matter if the Democratic nominee wins. It doesn't matter. They will decide who the winner is.
So, Donna.
I sat on the Rules Committee, and one day on the Rules Committee, and in my first year, the Freedom Caucus came in to defend some kind of a bill. And I turned to Jamie Raskin, who also the great constitutional lawyer who sits on Rules, and I said, these guys don't believe in government. And he said, welcome to the new Congress.
Yeah.
I mean, I have never heard things like that. I'm a political scientist. I had read about it, but to listen to supposed grown-ups who are elected to office, basically not believing fundamentally in our institutions was scary.
It's very scary. I recently had a conversation with Isabel Allende, and in talking to Isabel Allende, she was talking about how, for many, many years, Chile was the longest running democracy in Latin America, and literally overnight it disappeared. And I think those of us in this country who are sitting where we sit, so many of us are still, we still don't believe that it can disappear. The way when you read Ann Applebaum or you read Timothy Snyder and you see what they write and how quickly all of this can leave. So I think, I didn't really know what to expect when you and I, the three of us, sat down to talk. But I think what's really, really so profound is the reassertion of the fact that you two who served in Congress share the very same worries that so many people share right now, that our democracy is truly at stake, and that this election is so important that we need, as Donna says, we need to run through those holes in the offensive line as a University of Miami tailback as quickly as we can. So how much more forceful, Donna, do the Democrats now on the Hill need to be? You know,
Well,
like
they need to be very focused and very forceful. I mean, I'm all for the January 6th commission, but I think the agenda has to be that we have to restore voting rights in this country. We have to protect the institutions, the democratic institutions. And I believe that Speaker Pelosi gets it.
Oh,
but
yeah.
somehow we have to figure out how to get the Senate.
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody gets it, it's Speaker Pelosi.
But does Merrick Garland need to be more forceful in bringing people, to bringing charges to those people who were involved with the steal, that sort of thing? Or do we wait for the committee to run its course a little bit more?
Well, I wouldn't wait for anything. He has all sorts of things he can bring. The problem is the judicial system is slow. He appears to be slow in preparing the cases, but he's being careful because he wants to win. But I think at the end of the day, the Senate has to act. The House has acted. It's ready to go. The Senate has to act. And those senators they got 6-year terms. I don't know what they're afraid of.
All right. So what? All right. So I'm gonna.
And this doesn't have to do with the cost of Build Back Better.
Right.
This has to do with fundamental rights. And by the way, it's not the democracy alone that's at stake. It's the future of our children. It's their opportunities in the future.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
so fundamental, and that's what I worry about every day.
Absolutely. And so we can leave this on a note of action. So if we've come to the conclusion that the number one thing that we all really need to do is make sure that bill is passed, what buttons do we need to push? What makes them move? What makes those senators move? What makes the president move? What do we need to do? How do we mobilize to get something done along those lines?
Look, at the end of the day, I can say that unfortunately, money still has a lot of influence in our political system. Unfortunately, I mean, when we were in Congress, Donna and we helped pass a bill, HR 1. It was the priority of the House to take money out of politics. That hasn't gone anywhere. And I think that if you're close to this administration, if you're close to senators on the Hill, Congress members on the Hill, that's all you need to be saying, that you will not support them again for the re-election if they do not pass the Freedom to Vote Act. We need to be organized. We need to be on the streets. This is it. This is it. This is the call to action. We have to, because there will not be any advances on climate change. There will not be any laws that will protect our children from gun violence. There will not be access to healthcare if we lose our democracy. This is it. I mean, this is the last call here.
There are 4 seats, Senate seats, which we have a pretty good chance of winning. One is in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona. I think we're going to pick up that seat easily, and we have to keep the Georgia seats. But I think Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania are real opportunities. And of course,
Florida and North Carolina too.
Florida.
We have a real chance to win in Florida.
I think we do.
With Val Demings as our candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have to tell you, this is so energizing. I know that there's a lot of people may think of it as very scary, but it's energizing as well. And you are 2 people that I admire so much. And your voice is just hearing you through my computer makes me realize how much I miss you being on Capitol Hill. So I thank you both. And I think what we will do is we are going to start a kind of Writers for Democratic Action here in the state of Florida. And so we're going to call on you to, send me, all kinds of groups that everybody can work with. And we're going to try to disseminate that as best as we can.
Excellent.
But I thank you so much for being a part of this.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you. Mitch.
But Donna, before you go, you have to explain one thing.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have been staring at that picture behind you. Tell us that picture behind you and what it is.
Well, it's Bella Abzug. It's Bella Abzug, Gloria Steinem, and me at
I love that.
at 72 when I was president of Hunter College. Bella was a great graduate of Hunter, and she was, of course, a great friend of Gloria Steinem. And they came to Hunter, and this is the picture, and I treasure it because these are two extraordinary women whose shoulders Debbie and I stand on.
Absolutely. And if there's one thing the last few months have taught us, is if for nothing else, but to make sure that we have a Supreme Court that honors the rights of women and really does that. That is so important, given that legacy of those women that you just talked about. So again, thank you. I hate for this to end, but thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Bye-bye, everyone, and thank
Bye-bye.
you all out there.